Jules, that was so good as well. I was so happy with that. Oh, well.
Always something. We can just make
So
a joke
would you believe it? We have just given a 5-minute intro, explained everything, and the mics weren't turned on, of course. So
the joys of a first podcast, eh?
Yeah.
Well, second actually.
Okay, so let's re-go through that. Where did we start? Podcast. This is our first podcast. A few months ago, we sat around the table as a family. I was in a particularly difficult position. I felt like in a real place of limbo. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what God wanted for me to do next. And we'll go into more detail later on. But then collectively, when we sat there, we were praying, and I felt, and the rest of the family felt together, that actually maybe God wants us to start a podcast. So we thought about doing that, but then I started looking at all like the best equipment and whatnot. I have a tendency to want to do things to a perfect standard and not just start where I'm at.
Really?
Which can leave you kind of paralyzed because there's a fear of failure. I don't know what exactly, but you just want things to be done perfectly.
Yeah.
And we were listening to a podcast, and it was based on the disciples feeding the 5,000 and how they had nothing in their hands, essentially. But they just went and started. They went and did it. And Jesus was the one that enabled it at the time. So we felt really challenged to start with what was in our hands, which isn't too much, and just begin. And so this is take number 2. We tried one episode already. We didn't even have our house at that point. We were in the house we were renting in their garden. It was too hot. There were lots of mosquitoes. There were lots of flies. It wasn't fun, and it went on for too long. So we learned from our mistakes, and here we are, round 2, a couple of months later. Life got in the way a little bit, delayed it, but yeah, through that now, and ready to really kickstart recording episodes. Get down to it. Got a lot planned.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yep. So this is going to be more of a summary intro, isn't it? I think of what God's done in our life and what our spiritual.
Forgot something.
What did we forget?
We started off by saying welcome to our home. This is our home. Okay. The name of the podcast. It's called Our Home Podcast. It's a bit of a double meaning because this is our home, and we want to try and welcome, particularly mum and dad. I feel like that's your thing. You've always wanted to welcome people into your home. Hospitality has been such a big thing. Yeah,
we've done a lot of that over the years.
Yeah.
And also a big thing, welcoming people to find their place at home with God, to be at home with themselves, which, is something else we can expand on in later.
Yeah,
podcasts.
So welcome to our home.
Welcome,
Today we are going over our testimonies. That's the story for today. We want to talk about what God has done for us individually and our journey to faith, and how I think both of us really found, or only found, our home after we found it in God. Because to us, God is our home.
Mm-hmm.
And without God, I feel like there's a hole in your heart, a real lack of fulfillment.
Yeah. And for you, that's been relatively recent as well, hasn't it? Which is all going to be part of the story. For me, I've got quite a lot more years to talk about, probably about 35 or a bit more. Which is why,
or more than me.
Which is, a bit more than you.
It's more than that, isn't it?
I'm 56, and it was about 17. I haven't done the maths. Probably is a bit more.
Yeah.
But don't worry. That will just have to be a general summary today, because.
Just don't want that to brush against your mic.
Okay, because it would take a bit longer than your testimony to go over everything that God has done in my life in those years. But
I think with testimonies, you learn so many lessons along the way that you can really blow up those lessons at points. But that's where we went wrong in the first episode. We spent way too long going through all those points. Yeah, it was too detailed. Whereas in fact, as we release more episodes, we can go into detail as we go.
Yeah, definitely.
It's much better that way, yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want to go first with yours, or do you want me to go first?
I can go first if you like.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear, to be fair, because I've not heard it, I think, ever all in one go. I've heard little snippets, but half the snippets she told me when I was younger, I've just gone in one ear and out the other. So it'd be good to get it all recapped.
You sitting down and being able to take it in for like half an hour at a time would never have happened, would it?
No. Not even probably 6 months ago. Or maybe 6 months ago, but definitely not a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about where I've come from, some of the highlights. Do you want me to just go for it?
Yeah. Jump in.
Okay, so I guess to start with, normal kind of childhood in a sense. Well, that's not strictly true. I did what is normal anyway, eh? But I mean, my mum and dad were good people. They did have a faith. I found out after a while of knowing them that my mum actually and dad went like to a Billy Graham, like went forward at a Billy Graham crusade.
Really?
Yeah. Like early on, but I didn't find that out for ages, which is interesting.
Forrest Frank's new album has a Billy Graham testimony in it. He says he's got a, I can't remember what they're called, a bit where they speak.
Okay.
It'll come to me, and he says he's talking to his granddad in it, and he says the whole album is based in a recurring theme of this Billy Graham testimony about discovering what life is really all about.
Right.
So that really fits. The theme of the podcast. Yeah.
Amazing impact he's had. Which is crazy when you think about, when you watch what he did. It was so simple, but anyway, it was very big in the 60s or whenever my mum and dad must have gone forward. So yeah, they were good parents. They weren't perfect. No one's are. My dad particularly had very high standards. He had some anger issues, tendencies to be quite controlling at times, particularly with his anger. So we'd all like tiptoe around him. So I think that did definitely like cultivate in me. I was quite a sensitive soul, I think. A real thing of needing to win his approval, please people. And when my dad said, "You've done that well," that was rare. And you knew he really meant it. And it sounded like we were playing games and stuff. He'd never let you win.
Yeah.
Had to be totally genuine. But that did, there was a lot in me where I really wanted to win approval of him and of authority figures and whatever. And through my primary and teenage years, I think I did pick up quite a few kind of heart wounds, if you like, where I was, I felt like I had so much to offer, but I felt like I wasn't seen for who I was. I wasn't recognised. My dad was great in one way. He was the sort of dad who would say, you can do anything you set your mind to, Linz. So he was very positive in one way. But then there was this other side. And I remember being left out of certain things that I really wanted to do, like whether it's netball teams or musical productions or whatever. I was always like on the edge, like almost making it, but in the B team, not quite making it. So that was kind of the background as a kid. I mean, I was quite a popular kid. Wasn't that, but there was a lot going on inside. And I remember one netball teacher telling me once, "You've got such potential, but you're erratic." And I was like, what does erratic mean? I had to go home and ask my dad that night, what does erratic mean? They were like, inconsistent. And I was like, oh, okay. That word spoken over me as a 9-year-old in primary school by a PE teacher that I was desperately trying to get into the A team really had an impact on me. And it almost like created me.
Because I think that's had a real impact on me too.
Right.
A generational thing. Inconsistency was a huge thing for me.
I
think
did
erratic was
that.
a great way to describe me growing up and whatnot.
Well,
so
when I
actually say that.
When I became a Christian years later, part of becoming who God made me to be was I actually took authority over that word and said, I am not erratic, and I break the power of those words in Jesus' name, because that is not me. And I'm jumping way ahead here, but I massively changed. And if you asked people who knew me in my 20s, 30s, 40s, they'd actually say I was a really organised, consistent person. But as a teenager, hopeless, leaving trails of clothing around with me everywhere in the PE department. Story, so anyway.
Asked. That's interesting. You said asked.
Well, yeah, I know. You might hear some of my speech is a bit crazy mixed up because I grew up in London and then had
speech is a bit erratic.
All these years, all these years in Sheffield. So sometimes things come out like both. I might say ask, or I might occasionally say ask, and people are like, "What?"
Yeah, I've been working on her for many years, correcting her every time she says ask or bath, saying mum it's bath, mum it's ask.
Telling me I sound posh. Yeah. So some of my words have changed, but
that northern accent for a while. It's coming through. It's working.
It's coming through. But it's not always consistent.
No.
Anyway,
we're getting there.
Yeah. So skipping forward, I basically prayed a prayer called Journey into Life. It was a little booklet that was very popular when I was like 12. And it was a prayer where you were asking Jesus to come into your life and stuff. But I did not know the difference between a believer and a disciple. And this was the thing about my dad as well. He had a faith. He was really crazy about C.S. Lewis and that Christianity should be intellectually credible because he had the brain the size of a planet. So he'd come to faith.
That's where Ethan
like
must get it from.
Yeah.
Ethan's my brother.
Ethan's brother, who's really also has quite a large brain, doesn't he? Yeah. And he's got a real heart full of that, apologetics and all of that. And that's my dad. But in terms of living the life and what it meant to live the life of a disciple, he didn't really explain that to me. We didn't particularly go to church, maybe like 2 or 3 times in my entire like teenage years. So anyway, when I was about 17, I met this crazy woman.
So is that, sorry, just quickly, is that, you hear a phrase a lot that even Satan's a believer.
Yep.
He believes, but being a believer and a follower,
very different.
Yeah.
Very different.
Is that what you mean by disciple, follower?
Yeah, I believed, but I wasn't following any particular patterns of behavior. I wasn't really aware of any internal transformation that was changing my life. I just believed in God. I believed in Jesus specifically as well. And I would have defended him in an English class, but I didn't really know him. And he hadn't really changed my life. And anyway, I met this crazy charismatic, like very just, whoa, Christian who like said, praise the Lord every 5 minutes when I was 17. And I was like, who are you? And what are you about? And she was like, have you ever heard of like the Holy Spirit and the baptism of the Holy Spirit and all this stuff? And I'm like, no. She's like, come here. So she literally like grabbed me in her kitchen and said, let me pray for you. And so she prayed for me to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And I didn't even know what the heck that was. And I felt this really warm, like tingly feeling go all the way through me and felt a bit like woozy. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Which I now know was the presence of God and was the Holy Spirit making himself known to me. And that's the day from that day. Did you know this story?
No, I mean,
bits of it maybe.
Kind of rings bells, but when you put it all together like that. Yeah, no, I didn't know it was that.
That is when it really changed.
And how old are you? 17?
17. And like the next day I just felt totally different, and I felt full of like I'd come alive is the only way to explain it really. And it was like, Jesus, this is real. And just everything just changed. And the church that she was going to, she took me along and I met the minister, and it was just like totally different to any sort of church or any experience I've had. And they talked to me about deliverance and all sorts of stuff, which anyway, I won't go into the details of that now, but the next few weeks totally changed my life. And I remember like going into McDonald's in my crazy phase for a few months and telling the guy behind the counter, Jesus loves you and Jesus is real. I'm not necessarily recommending doing that, but that is just what I did at like a 17-year-old who'd suddenly gone,
how
what
did he
the
take
heck?
That?
Well, the really funny thing is, you know this story, right? Don't you? Do you remember?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the really funny thing was he went, I know. I know Jesus. And I was like, what? You do? So yeah, that was quite funny.
So that one worked out quite well.
Yeah, that was quite funny. So yeah, that was that. And then I guess skipping forward, I actually got married really young. I met my husband now, still my husband, George, and got married actually within a year of meeting him. So right before I was 19, I got married. He walked into my church. He was over here from the US. We joined Youth with a Mission within 3 years of that, sold our house, gave up everything.
YWAM for sure. Maybe you've heard of YWAM.
He was like an officer in the US Air Force, earning big money, driving a flashy car. I really didn't like him at first, by the way. I wanted to go and work with Jackie Pullinger in Hong Kong with the triad drug addicts because I'd read her book and was like, yes, here I am, Lord, send me. So anyway, he grew on me. We talked Christian music and stuff. And married George within a year. We went and worked with YWAM for 6 years, had lots of adventures. I worked with Tier Fund as a regional manager for 6 years as well. There's something about 6 years in my life. Lots of things were 6 years. And then I worked at Cabin was 6 years. I worked at a very large church in the north of England, one of the largest churches in England, for 6 years. I was on the leadership team there, kind of the forefront of like the missional community movement. and also opened our own business for, it's going 8 years now,
8 years
but
now, yeah,
6
yeah.
years that we were there. So and during that time, I mean, goodness, what an adventure I have had with God. He's done incredible things, tons and tons of amazing stories, some miraculous, also some real lows, some real kind of dark nights of the soul, or dark years of the soul even, where it was tough, questioning what you believe. And I think, you know, the type of faith that I have now, lots that I've always believed, I still believe. Some things have changed as I've reflected on stuff and been concerned or disillusioned with some of the things I've seen, or thought, no, actually, I can see the damage that particular way of thinking has done. So I'd like to think I'm a bit older and wiser, and I do have a heart to share some of those things, because I really do have a heart for people who have actually been put off Jesus because the church has hurt them, or Christians have been damaging.
Yeah,
a real heart for those people, and I can see why that happens, and I hope that some of the things that we want to share will be a blessing for people like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people disillusioned with church, and I can see why. I didn't get on with church for a very long time. Still didn't say I super get on with church, but I have come to a point where I appreciate church a lot more than I used to.
Yeah. And even defining what church is worth doing, isn't it? Because church is people. Church is not a service.
Yeah,
church
it really
is not
helped
a
me
building.
actually when I think Dad explained that the church where someone gets up and preaches on a Sunday was developed in the Roman times during the theatre era, and someone would come up and preach and everyone would come and listen, and it's
Constantine, really.
And it's kind of stayed the same for almost 2,000 years, and you think, whoa.
Yeah, that's not what the early church looked like. They were in homes, they had homes and businesses in homes together.
Lots of home churches,
often just like no more than 30 people, because the homes weren't big enough. So there's a whole podcast we could do on what is church, like that. But it was not what we see today, and yet that's kind of held up as you've got to do it this way, and if you're not part of that or doing it like that, you're doing something wrong, and that's really not good, because Jesus is all about the kingdom, not church as man has designed it.
Yeah, and I have a massive heart for trying to help people realize that they have the direct relationship with Jesus, and they don't have to go through a church, they don't have to go through a pastor, they don't have to go through someone else. The whole point of this is, no, just speak to God directly.
The
whole point is speak to Jesus directly. You have that relationship with him, and there's no mediator.
I remember you coming to church with us a few times, and often saying stuff like, Mum, I could never bring my non-Christian or not yet Christian, or outside of church, normal friends to somewhere like this. They just wouldn't get it. The whole culture it's just weird. I couldn't do it. And that's also interesting in and of itself, isn't it? So.
And I think for the majority of people, or the majority of the time, that's true. I think as I've got older, you start to witness like some more miracles. You bring someone into church who you never thought would like church, and they do like church because they meet God. But it's so
true.
Incredible, and it's so a miracle. It's so much of a miracle, because it's like, how could they possibly like that? But I do think that's very limiting, because that may happen 1, 2 in 10. It doesn't happen 10 out of 10 times. There are so many people that walk into a church and then just walk straight back out. And there are so many people that would never even dream of walking into a church because of what it is and the stipulation around it. And I can completely understand that.
So why don't you tell us, actually?
Well, I just want to say that you are not erratic anymore. At all. I think it's funny that was spoken over you, and you believed you were that, or were that when you were younger, because you're not like that at all. I think you're very, very consistent now. So actually, I'm a bit surprised that was you when you were younger. Definitely grown up and matured.
Yes, I also had a massive fear of failure and other things as well. I really, for years, still sought approval. And cared far too much about what other people thought, and that's a whole nother journey that I've been through, which I didn't mention. I probably should slip in there as well, because I think that's really common for people, and dare I say, especially women, who other people's approval and what other people think of you and comparing yourself to other people is massive. For me, it wasn't so much the comparison, but it was whenever I did something, like even if I gave a talk, I'd come back and I'd be like, how was it? Was it good? Was it okay?
Yeah.
And if George didn't say, which he normally did because he's lovely. Yeah, that was good. But I'd be like, no, but really? No, but was it really? Are you really being honest with me? And it took me years to get to the point where I did something, and if I felt God was happy with it and I was happy with it, reasonably happy with it, didn't have to be perfect, that was okay. I didn't have to get 10 people coming up to me afterwards saying, oh, that was a great talk, Linz, because it didn't matter whether it got high praise or was criticized. It didn't affect me internally. So yeah, God's done a massive thing in my life in terms of my identity, self-esteem, not worrying about what other people think. Huge thing, which I think is
well, I called you a few months ago when I'd really worked hard on some social media content for our business and posted it. And, I'm an optimist, so I always believe, if I post this, it's going to be great. And often kind of probably hoping that it's just great from the beginning. And I posted this stuff and it just didn't take off. It wasn't the best stuff that I'd ever posted before. And I'd had some success posting stuff in the past. So I think you just kind of think it's going to be great, it's going to be great. And it wasn't. And I remember feeling really like rejected because it was my face, it was my voice, and it hadn't taken off. And it's like, are people rejecting you? Yeah, it's what it felt like. And fortunately, it was very quick having a conversation with you and realizing and going, nope, okay. Social media is very much trial and error, especially when you're starting off. So I tried this same type of video 3 times, didn't work. So that doesn't work. Move on and try the next thing.
Yeah.
But
I loved them though. I thought they were great.
Yeah, you loved them. And I think the one you loved did okay. It was the 3 following on from that were no good. But really putting yourself out there, and even with this podcast, putting ourselves out there. And the first time I went through the editing and stuff, you just sit there and go, oh, I hate it. And after you've watched it back 10 times, the first time you watch it back and go, oh, I quite like that. On the 10th time of watching back the podcast while you're editing it, it's like, I hate it. I can never put this out. I can't do it. You're like, God, why do you want me to put this out? It's terrible. We could have done it so much better.
Yeah.
And I feel like we'll be that with every single episode, especially if me editing it and watching it back. I'm going to be like, I just don't want to post this. I'm going to have to be praying every time. Like, Lord, I'm being obedient. Okay, I'm only doing this because I feel you've asked me to.
Yeah. And social media is terrible, isn't it? The way people have the right to feel they've got the right to respond to stuff. So it's the worst.
Social media is awful. I can't wait till we have an episode on social media or get to go into it more. I think it's
way harder now than it ever was for me. You get judged by the people in the room at the time when you do something like that's performance related, whereas now you get 5 million people thinking they can rip you to shreds on social media that you never meet, and I'm not surprised people just don't read it.
I think one of the biggest
don't go there.
biblical principles, if I could instill just one into the world overnight, it's where Paul talks about if you do think you need to correct someone or whatnot, you do it one-to-one first. You don't do it publicly, you do it one-to-one. And if the person that you're correcting in a loving way, he specifies as well, to do it with love, not to be harsh, not to be cold, but to do it with love. And to do that, and if it just really doesn't resonate or the person just ignores it and keeps going, you bring someone else in, someone who's older, someone who's more experienced, someone to mediate. And then failing that, then you bring it to the attention. He says he's in relation to the church, into the public. But you go through those steps first. And I think social media has really skewed that.
Yeah.
People think that they just have the right to come and speak. And I get people will say, well, if you put something online, people are I understand if you put something online, you are opening yourself up to that, but it doesn't mean that it's right. And it is a shame that people think that just because they see something, they can type through a screen and say whatever they want, when 90% of them wouldn't dare dream of saying it to your face in person.
Absolutely.
So I think it can be a really horrible place.
Yeah.
Social media. Really horrible place. But
getting back to where we were, so we don't take another an hour and a half like the last time. Jordan, I would really like to know, or I'd like you to tell people, how did you get from someone who was quite anti-church? I remember conversations with you about whether Jesus was a spaceman or not, or an alien.
Ancient astronaut theory.
All sorts of stuff, which I was really trying to, take
that was a fun
seriously.
That was a very fun rabbit hole.
You had some interesting rabbit holes. How did you get from that it's been relatively recent for you, hasn't it? How did you get from that place to where you are now?
I got from that place through direct encounters with God. And I think a big part of what people miss these days is, I think it's kind of expected that you're supposed to listen to someone talk about God and have them change your mind. And I think that is the complete wrong way to look at it. If you hear what I've said and then decide, oh, I'm just going to be a Christian and follow God because I like what he said, I think you've completely missed the point, because those foundations are so shallow. As soon as something comes to challenge them, they'll just break. The whole point of developing a relationship with God is it's actually his job to create foundations in you that cannot be shaken. And that's what he did for me. I had encounters with him that were just completely unexplainable. And probably get into them now, tell people about it. So my story started off when I was younger. So when I was 7 or 8, I was sexually abused by an older girl. And I've spoke about this before, so some people listening may know. But yeah, that opened me up to a whole world that obviously I should not have been opened up to, and it was tough. And I think, yeah, had loads of feelings of guilt and shame, which I didn't even realise. You see, I only realised I'd been sexually abused when I was 16 or 17. I heard of a load of football scandals coming out where young players went and trialled and their coaches abused them. And for years and years and years, they always thought it was their fault, like it was 50-50 that they were part to blame. And then I was on a coach going to a game once, listening to the news or a podcast or something, and it just flashed in my mind like, oh my goodness, for all this time, I have believed that I was to blame for that. Like I was involved and I wanted to do it just the same. It was like 50-50. And it just hit me that I was 7 or 8 years old, and you cannot consent to that stuff for a reason. You can't, it's just, you can't be held responsible for that position. But yeah, that affected a lot of my life, led to a lot of feelings of guilt and shame, particularly growing up in a Christian household and being exposed to that world. Obviously, I was very curious about sex from a very young age, probably more so than you even realised. And yeah, the added guilt of being raised in a Christian household where you'd said like, oh, marriage should be saved for sex. Sex should be saved for marriage, sorry. Yeah, added a lot. It was tough, and I didn't realise how tough until later. But in between that, I played a lot of football, and I was pretty good when I was younger. And I ended up getting offered a professional contract when I was 15. Wasn't allowed to sign it until 17, but on my 17th birthday, I signed my professional contract. Then, like December the 1st, I had a lot of money. I'd already bought a brand new Mercedes Benz. It was white, it was gorgeous. I loved it. And then on the 17th of December, I passed my driving test. So less than 2 months after turning 17, I was a professional footballer, had a brand new Mercedes Benz, had a girlfriend at the time who was pretty. It was coming up to Christmas, and I had everything that pretty much any young boy in this world would want. Money, people knew me on Instagram. I just scored a hat-trick at Hillsborough as well.
Oh, so I remember that well.
Things were going great. I had the car. And a few months later, I found myself in a position where I was sat in my car at the top of this big hill/cliff in Sheffield, debating driving off. I had all these things, and it just led me to this point where I was contemplating suicide. I had a box of paracetamol in my car, and to this day, I know that if you take paracetamol, it's a long death. It can take like 24 hours to 3 days before you die, and if you don't get medical care within 24 hours, there's nothing that they can do, and you just die a slow death. And that really put me off. Luckily, I didn't want to.
Thank God.
Didn't want to go through all of that. But yeah, I was sat on top of that cliff for a couple of hours, just like debating. And luckily, I called a friend, and I went to stay at his dad's with him instead. He was actually with his girlfriend, and he let me come and stay. I was on a water bed, and he was on the bed next to it. And that night, he did wake me up whilst he was shagging his girlfriend. which I'm not going to reveal his name on the
No,
podcast.
don't do that.
But when it comes to his wedding, I think I'll be quite excited to tell that story. But if he is listening, he will know who he is. But yeah, I had all this stuff, and just brought me to a place of emptiness.
Yeah.
Hated it.
And I think
hated life at the point.
Yeah, and I think like drinking was another thing that I remember.
It wasn't that bad at that point.
Oh, was it
so
not?
No, well, I was playing football.
Okay.
I was quite good at not drinking. It was very
Okay.
rare. I'd drink like only once every 2 months or a few times in the summer, but I was very conscious about wanting to feel good. So I didn't drink much at that point.
So the feeling low to the point where you wanted to take your life. And by the way, it's very weird hearing all this in summary. I feel weird because at the time, these things were absolutely huge for me. I didn't find out about the abuse or a lot of stuff till much later. I think you were 18 when you told me. So it's always weird when you see this played back because it feels like I'm not engaging with what you're saying. But obviously I am.
Yeah, we've had these conversations
I'm just listening
a lot
for the point of you being able to tell everyone else.
Yeah.
But yeah. So when you got so low that you wanted to take your life, was that because of the pressure of football or the emptiness, or
it was just empty? You know, okay. I had everything that I thought I ever would have wanted. I wasn't playing in the first team, but I was a professional footballer. I got to go in at 9 o'clock every day and leave at 12, 1 o'clock. I was living that life, and I was just so depressed and empty. It just felt meaningless, everything that I had. It was like, what is the point to all this?
Yeah.
And especially then when you go through tough points when you play football, it's not all 100% brilliant. And so when those tough points came, it was hard. And then I remember breaking down in front of you. I've been saying for a while, I just don't know if I want to be a professional footballer.
Yeah.
And you tried to encourage me, like, you've come so far. Don't give it up now. Like, keep going, keep pushing through. And then eventually I cried for like the first time in 10 years in front of you.
Yeah,
and then
I remember
you knew
that.
How bad it was.
Something was seriously wrong.
So we started looking at other options, and then I went into the club. It was December. I had 6 months or half a year left on my deal. And they talked about getting a new deal. Mm-hmm. And I was going to have another 1 year extension.
Yeah.
But I just told them I didn't want to be a professional footballer anymore. It was the only way to get out of my contract. I just had to tell them I was done, and I wanted to go to America and explore education. Otherwise, I couldn't really just leave. So I had to leave by mutual consent in January. They let me go.
That was to do a scholarship with football, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was after a few meetings. I had to go in and really convince them that I didn't want to be a footballer anymore. They had to buy it. So it took a few meetings. They tried to convince me to stay, but I just said, "No, I've had enough. This life isn't for me." And then I went out to America, kind of just pursuing. I had a hole in my heart, and I was just looking to fill it. I was trying to find that fulfillment somewhere. So I went out into America thinking that would be great, that would be different. And then I spent 1 semester in Oregon, and I ended up running away from there essentially, because anytime something got tough or I felt offended, I was more inclined to just leave. It's such a big lie that I see people believing today. It's that, you know, follow your heart. If something doesn't make you happy, then just leave. And for years, I believed that.
Yeah.
Just thinking, well, if this doesn't make me happy, you know, life is short, I've got to go find something that makes me happy. But you find that if you're constantly in the pursuit of happiness, you're always on the move, because you can't find happiness. Happiness is a fleeting moment. Some things make you happy, some things don't. And there's always going to be things that make you unhappy. So you're always just going to be searching and reaching for it. But I left Oregon, I moved to North Carolina, and then the same thing happened there. After a longer period, I got offended. I felt disrespected just for one moment, and I started looking elsewhere. And then I came back to England. Now, at these points, that's where I was sort of drinking way more, getting into drugs, and then obviously women as well, or sex. I used all three of those things, just continuously looking. And obviously when you start in the moment, those things feel great. They're meant to feel good. But after you do it for a prolonged period of time, you just feel empty. And like a drug, you just don't get that same high as you did at the start. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it can feel more like a compulsion and lead to addiction. So I used all these vices, all these things that the world will sometimes tell you will make you happy, all these things that are freeing and liberating. It's freedom disguised. Oh, you're sexually free. do what you want, follow your heart, do what makes you happy, all these things that are supposed to bring freedom, and none of it ever did. It just made me more miserable and feel worse. And again, exploring things like New Age practices, meditation, whatnot, all those things maybe worked for a little bit, but still just left me feeling empty. There was always this lack of fulfillment in my heart. And then I came back to England, COVID happened, and I ended up really hyper focusing on fitness for a point. And you see, if you're healthy, you'll feel good. If your body's right, your mind will be right, and vice versa. And so I really focused on my body and physicality. And, I had the 8% body fat. I've been absolutely ripped. I've ran 5K in under 19 minutes. I've bench pressed 100 kg. I've ran half marathons. Like I used to play football. So I've hit these measures that are quite impressive. People, when they start out, they think, I'd love to get to that point. And I hit all this stuff. And again, for periods of time when you're dialed in and things are going great, you feel good. But at the end of it all, none of it has ever been able to continuously sustain me. It always left me feeling empty. So I've tried the vice stuff, the sex, the drugs, the drinking, but I also have tried the money, all that stuff. But I've also tried the fitness, the meditation, the mindful wellness approach, and none of it worked. And I ended up in a very toxic, lust-fueled relationship. I ended up, as happened many times before, getting into bed with someone too soon, and that being the driving factor, sex. And then I found myself in a situation that was really toxic. We were terrible for each other, but the sex brings you back. And then even if you got into it for the wrong reasons, feelings develop. And to whatever capacity I understood love at the time, I was in love with this person, and it was very difficult. But I remember at one point just feeling like I really wanted more positive influence around me. And I don't think I had a lot of negative influence, but I had a lack of positive influence. So no one was saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. But no one was saying, I believe in you, you can do this, you can do that, other than you guys, really. But I wanted it everywhere. So I reached out to an old church friend, and I was like, yo, what church do you go to? He told me. I said, can I come along to a small group? I was still working on Sundays, so I couldn't go to church. Thought, listen, I don't believe the same things they're going to believe, and they won't believe the same things that I'm going to believe, but we don't really have to talk about that. I just want to be surrounded by more positive people. So it was quite selfish, to be honest. And so I go along to this group, and I ended up meeting this amazing girl. She was a great friend. And she really helped me through some difficult times. It came up to about your birthday, about 18 months ago, July 2023. And I just started to feel awful. It was after me and this girl broke up. And as I'd been going to this small group, I'd kind of got a bit closer to God. And I just felt like the situation that I was in was not his best for me. So for the first time ever in my life, I didn't go back to a situation. It was the first time I had like a reason not to go back, and it was, this isn't God's best, this isn't God's best. And this other friend that I'd met, she was amazing. She really helped me through this. She was a great rock at the time, and it was amazing to see the difference between two different people, where she was so loving, so patient, so kind, so gentle towards me, even when I was difficult. She was really fantastic, and I really felt like I started to understand God's love a bit, because you see someone who's just like filled with God and his presence, and you see how different they are.
Yeah.
That was the turning point.
She radiated the presence of God,
radiated God. And then I remember there was one time when I kind of just had enough. I'd gone out and drank too much, and she'd end up bringing me home, and you'd open the door and took me in and been like, oh my goodness, what's happened? Obviously, I don't remember. I was blacked out drunk. But I remember the next day we went for a walk, and I was just sat there, and I said to her, I was like, how am I ever going to get on with my life when I'm so inconsistent, so erratic? When it comes to relationships, how could I possibly ever be married to someone when I go through these cycles of loving someone for 2 weeks and then essentially hating them or wanting nothing to do with them for the next 2 weeks? How am I ever going to be able to be with someone if that is the pattern that happens all the time, the push someone away to then come back to them? And she was a bit older than me, and she said, well, I used to be like that when I was your age, and I just didn't believe it. Like seeing someone so nice, you just think it's impossible. But I asked her, I said, well, what was the difference? What happened? What did you do? And essentially, she introduced me into God properly. At that point, she prayed over me, and that was the first time I had an encounter like with God. And that's when I came into the room saying, I've just met God. I could hear him in my head for the first time ever. And that was a massive thing. And if you've grown up around church, chances are you probably haven't heard God before. It's so common that you go to church and other people are hearing God, and it's like, I never hear God. God doesn't speak to me. And that had been me. And then for that moment to hear like God for the first time and be like, oh my goodness, he's in my head. I can feel his presence. It makes so much sense. He's real.
He actually ran
I ran
into the room and said, I know you've prayed loads, Mum. I mean, your prayers, are all right, but this person, oh my gosh, I've just been like sat talking to Jesus for like 20 minutes. That's what you said.
Yeah, it was crazy.
We were like, and what?
Again, at some point, we'll probably go into more detail, but from that moment on, I was like, okay, God, I've met you for the first time properly.
Yeah, so it was a powerful, real encounter.
Let's pursue this.
You felt him speak to you, didn't you?
Really. But now at this time, that was after your birthday, but like at this time, I was in a real depression. Like a real heartbreak has been massive for me. Whenever I go through a heartbreak or even something that triggers heartbreak. So I've seen people for just 6 weeks at some point, and then we break up, and it just feels like the worst thing ever. It's totally blown out of proportion. It doesn't make sense.
And can I just say, and not only that, we have noticed as your parents, we've observed that at really key times in your life, repeatedly, when you're about to step into something really important and new, like going to Oregon or going to wherever, there would be a massive breakup with the girl that would break your heart and completely derail you from what
self-sabotage, really.
Yeah.
And it really messed me up. So I was in one of these deep depressions where every single day I just felt miserable. I was on the verge of tears. And again, I don't really cry much. So to be on the verge of tears every single day, crying most days, is completely uncharacteristic. And then combine that with just this incredible anxiety all the time. I was so anxious.
Yeah.
And there was two incredibly powerful moments with God. Number one, I just played a football game. And I just played with, it was a pub team. I played with some friends. The level was just average, and I'd really enjoyed it because there wasn't much pressure. And we played this team in pre-season, and all their players get paid. So they were a proper team in the league structure. And we'd drawn 3-3. So obviously we'd massively overachieved. I'd scored 2 goals and assisted, and played 90 minutes for the first time in ages. I suffered with injury problems. And so to do that should have been this incredible achievement. And then after the game, after we'd had a drink, I just felt so anxious I couldn't speak. So I left. And I shouldn't have been feeling that way after a game. But it really reminded me of 4 years previous in Oregon, when I'd felt the exact same way, having gone to Oregon during a breakup, played an amazing game, and I'd cried walking back by myself on the way to the changing room because I just felt so anxious and upset.
Yeah.
And I realized 4 years later, I was in the exact same position, and I was so angry. Like, how am I still in this same position 4 years later? How am I still going through the same cycles? So I called her up and I was like, I'm so frustrated. Why am I still in the same place? Like, how is this still happening? And she said, do you want me to pray for you? She was miles away. It was over the phone, late at night. I just thought, what the fuck is that going to do, to be honest? Like,
yeah.
All right, so many people have offered to pray, and it's never really done anything, especially when you're upset. Someone's upset, do you want me to pray for you? Yeah, sure. What's it going to do? So she prayed, and I find it really interesting how the entire car journey, when she prayed, was the only moment that the phone started cracking up. I was going through these woods, and I don't know what she said for 2 minutes. But within those 2 minutes, it was like, you imagine this glass. At the start of those 2 minutes, I was so anxious, this glass would have been full with anxiety. And by the end of those 2 minutes, while she was praying, and again, I have no idea what she was saying because the phone was breaking up, the anxiety just like melted away. It's like the level just came all the way down to the point where I was none.
Amazing.
There was none. And for the first time in months, I felt completely normal. And I couldn't believe it. I actually said to her, what witchcraft was that? Because I was like, how is that possible? Yeah. Okay. And for those of you that have suffered with anxiety, anxiety does not just go away like that.
No.
That's never happened in my life before, and it's never happened in my life since. But when someone else prayed for me, the anxiety disappeared. And I just thought, that's crazy. And it couldn't have been a placebo effect, because I have no idea what she said. To this day, not a clue what words she used. So it wasn't like these words were subconsciously coming in.
And you didn't believe they were going to work either.
And at the beginning, I thought, what is this going to do?
Yeah.
So I had no faith that this was going to work. And yeah, it worked anyway.
Yeah.
So that was incredible. Again, I was like, okay, God, I trust you. Like, let's keep going.
Something's real here.
But that was in August. Yeah. And then fast forward to October the 12th. And I'd still been in this depression. I was sat outside Archer Road, Sainsbury's in Sheffield again, just so distraught something had happened. And I was just crying like, God, why am I still in pain? It's been like 3 months and I still feel like the breakup was yesterday. How does this make sense? I know the person wasn't good for me. I don't want to be with them. Why do I still feel this way? Why am I still so anxious? Why am I still in so much pain? And then I had this podcast on, and I was in somewhere else when I was thinking these things, and then I came back to in the moment, and I heard the podcast, the guy who was speaking, he said that God's restrictions are not restrictions, they are protections. And again, there was a light bulb moment in my head when I just realized that the thing that had caused me so much pain was choosing to jump into bed with someone, getting into a situationship or relationship that was bad because I'd wanted to have sex, and then breaking up because that person was not right for me or good for me. It had caused me so much pain over and over and over again. And I thought in that moment, if I had done things God's way, if I had waited, if I had saved that for marriage, all this pain that I feel now would have been avoided. And it just clicked for me and made sense in the moment. Like, I don't understand why God does this stuff, but he does it for our best interests. It's not I don't want you to enjoy life. It's like I had done this thing and enjoyed life, and it had only caused me pain. God knew better. He wanted to save me from that, and I ignored him. And that's why I was in this pain. And up until that moment, even though I'd become a Christian, because I'd had so much sex and been through it and just had full-on relationships where I was sleeping with people, I hadn't fully decided, okay, I'm going to wait till marriage to have sex. I was like, I've done it, so I may as well just continue, you know. I thought, when I find the right person, or when I find the person, then I'll decide if I'm going to wait until marriage to have sex. I'll see what they want to do. And because of that, I'd left this door open. By not making a choice, I had actually made a choice. And so in that moment, I said, after that realization, I sat in the car and I just said, God, I don't understand why you don't want humans to have sex before marriage, okay? But I'm choosing to trust you. I make a covenant with you and I make a promise that I will not have sex until I get married. I said any open doors, any authority that I've given to the enemy, any way that I've let them in, I said, I just remove that now in the name of Jesus. I said, be gone. And I didn't feel anything in the moment. And I went in and I remember I got a salmon and cream cheese sandwich and I went back home. I ate it. I went to bed. And I had been depressed for 3 months straight, more than 3 months, in so much pain. The only respite I'd had been after that prayer in the car, that couple of hours before I went to sleep. And the next day I woke up and felt amazing. I felt so happy. I felt like I was free. I felt a joy. I felt peace. And I just thought, this is too good to be true. I was waiting. I was like, oh, well, we'll see if I feel this way tomorrow. And then the next day I woke up and I just felt better. And then the next day I woke up and I felt better. And I've finally had this like Jesus high that people talk about when you have truly been set free. So clearly that part of my life, which I had decided to hold on to and not give over to God, I gave it over to him and suddenly I was free and I could not believe it. And those two instances have absolutely solidified my faith, because to me, there is no other explanation.
Yeah.
How does a depression get cured overnight after saying that prayer and giving this over to God?
Yeah.
Giving that part of my life, which had caused me so much pain, to God. And then suddenly I was set free. So to me, that was just completely undeniable. All anxiety overnight, gone. All depression overnight was gone.
It's amazing. There's so many things that I want to come back on that, and I know we haven't got time, but it's reminded me too of I missed out the bit where I'd also experienced abuse as a kid, and the whole sexual area had been opened up too soon to me as well. And I remember seeing a Guerrilla Christian thing about sex before marriage, and there were different views on it in terms of before marriage or when you're engaged or whatever. but the general line was, it's not God's best.
We've had really similar lives.
Yeah,
it's kind of strange how
it is
similar
really interesting.
our lives have been, and I can't wait to get into that more.
Yeah,
because there's some incredibly exciting things, but our lives have been kind of mirrored.
And
things you struggled with.
Yeah, some of them are very similar. And I was also sleeping with someone at the time, and I'd only just become a Christian and experienced that moment. And for me, it wasn't like, it was a very different story to yours. So I wasn't empty or any of the stuff that you said. I came to Jesus because Jesus revealed himself to me and was really real to me. And it wasn't a crutch. It wasn't because I was really at a low point or any of that. And I think that's really important to say, that people come to Jesus in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had gone back to my boyfriend at the time and said, we're not doing it anymore. I don't really fully get this. And I only learned sort of as time went by in terms of why God says it and why it is for our protection. And I said, we're not doing this anymore. And again, I'm sure that it's like we said about believing in discipleship. When you hand over parts of your life to God that you're hanging on to, even if you are a Christian, you enter much greater levels of freedom and joy. But I also do want to just ask, Jordan, what would you say? Because it's so prevalent in our culture. And I think some people hearing this, even me kind of talking about not having sex before marriage, it feels like a really judgy thing to say when the whole culture is, guys could do it all the time, and now women are now able to do it all the time, because why was it, guys were able to do that and women were always called slags. And I kind of get why there are these pendulums. We're not sitting in judgment on people that are having sex before getting married, are we? You're just sharing why it was so important for you.
Yeah, I just want to share the impact that it had for me.
Yeah.
And I think on that, again, I'm not here to try and convince people that they're doing wrong, because I believe that a lie will always be revealed in the end. If someone's believing a lie or believing that what they're doing is bringing them freedom and making them happy, if it truly is a lie, at some point, it will no longer make them happy. And I think I came to that moment and was able to understand that. And I do believe that everyone will eventually come to that moment, whether or not they choose to act on it. But it's like it will resonate with people.
Yeah.
It will resonate because you will agree. Maybe not now, maybe in 5 years. You hear one thing, in 5 years it triggers, actually, I feel so empty doing all of this stuff. Maybe it is a lie. Yeah. And then that's where the door is open to
because I know
different thoughts. Yeah.
I know sometimes some people, they're always saying that Christians historically are always banging on about certain things, and sex is one of them. And it's not that. I think the phrase that you had about restrictions are, say it again.
The rules in the Bible that God has are not restrictions. They are protections. Everything in there is to protect us from pain that he knows we will experience.
Yeah. And it's not that God created sex. Sex is great. Sex is really important. It's just a protection that sex, even from the point of view of kids being born and the breakdown of families and all that sort of stuff.
And I do think that Christians care kind of too much. If someone's listening to this and they're having sex, I couldn't care less kind of what you're doing with your life, having sex with your boyfriend, girlfriend, choosing to do that. It doesn't affect me at all. I think the point is that if you feel empty, if you feel in pain, you're unsure why, you're doing this to fill a gap, it's like there's encouragement. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. There is another way.
And you did feel that when you were having sex, because you were very promiscuous. I did not feel that.
Promiscuous.
I did not feel that in my situation.
Promiscuous boy.
I remember having sex and lying there thinking, and actually saying to my boyfriend at the time, these Christians that say that, sex in any way outside of marriage is not necessarily or right, they are crazy, because it feels absolutely right and wonderful and great. So I think, you can come at it from different places. So we're not in judgment on anyone. We understand where people are coming from.
Yeah. No, 100%.
It's just good to share story.
Yeah, I'm absolutely massive on judgment. Lack of judgment.
You are.
It's a huge thing. The journey that I've been on, I felt so judged.
Yeah.
By church, by you, by a lot of people around me.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I really tried not to as well.
Okay.
It just, that was one of the things that broke my heart. We've got there in the end.
But yeah, so many times in the Bible, I think people love to quote Paul, especially Christians, when they want to correct people. Everyone wants to be a Paul. But just quick side note, most people are not Pauls. Okay, if you've not gone through a Paul experience, you don't have the right to act like a Paul. But yeah, so many people are quick to judge, and Paul himself talks about complete lack of judgment, and how you are judged, you will be judged. And and Jesus talked about that directly. Why look at the speck in your brother's eye when there's a log in your own? Christians are so far too quick to judge, and it is so frustrating to see. Yeah,
it's the Holy Spirit who is our primary discipler.
Yeah.
And it's the Holy Spirit who will speak to you, and everybody's journey and spiritual journey is completely different.
Yeah, and it's about your direct relationship
with God, and He works with you in the right time.
Yeah.
Speaking of time, we are probably out of time. I have no idea how long we've been speaking, but
a bit longer than we meant to, I think.
Okay.
But it's okay. It's not too long. Yeah.
Cool. So until the next time.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. If anyone has listened and got this far, we don't know who's going to listen, if anyone. But yeah, we plan to do a lot more. Yeah, we really want to commit to this for a good period of time. We just want to commit to this in general. We want to do it. Yeah. We're planning to do a lot. So we hope you stick around, share it with your friends or family or anyone who you think may benefit.
Cool.
Great, yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Yeah, see you next time.
At our home.
Yeah.